Welcome, fellow explorers. My name is Christian Alexanderson, and this is Hemlocks to Hellbenders, a podcast highlighting Pennsylvania's parks, forests, and great outdoors. To list all of the features of Forbes State Forest would be pointless. That's because it has so much to offer so many people. You want trails? It's got it. You want overlooks? It's got it. You want waterfalls? It's got it. Forbes State Forest has some of the best land in Pennsylvania for everything from mountain biking and hiking to ATV riding and wildlife watching. The forest is comprised of 15 tracts totaling almost 59,000 acres in Pennsylvania's Laurel Highlands. You could spend decades exploring this wonderful forest and still discover new things every single day. From its 250 miles of hiking trails to its 3 designated wild and natural areas, Forbes State Forest is just special, plain and simple. The abundance of forest land over such a large portion of southwest Pennsylvania provides visitors with so many options. Maybe today I'll check out Mount Davis, the highest point in Pennsylvania. Or maybe I'll see the wildflower blooms. Or perhaps I'll explore the remnants of 2 civilian conservation corps camps. On any visit, you'll find it difficult to pick any one thing you like most about Forbes State Forest. There's just too many. Just listen to a couple of the reviews I found from visitors. "This place is amazing," said Doug from Baden. "We're looking forward to returning and exploring some more." "This is a beautiful area," said Marissa from Ohio. "It was just stunning and well worth the visit." And finally, Amy from Pittsburgh said, "If you're hiking, biking, skiing, living your life, or being active outside, this is a great place to go." I couldn't have said it better myself. Forbes State Forest is the place to go. And I'm going to prove it to you on this episode. But before we learn more about the forest, here's the stats. Forbes State Forest is a 59,000 acre forest located in Fayette, Somerset, and Westmoreland counties. Available activities include hiking, mountain biking, horse riding, ATV riding, picnicking, fishing, hunting, camping, sightseeing, snowmobiling, and cross-country skiing. A notable feature of the forest is that it's home to Mount Davis, the highest point in Pennsylvania. Forbes State Forest is named for General John Forbes, who, in 1758, ordered the construction of a road from Bedford to Fort Pitt for the British Army's attack on Fort Duquesne during the French and Indian War. Nearby towns include Latrobe, Somerset, Johnstown, and Ohiopyle. State lands that are close by include Ohiopyle, Keystone, Laurel Mountain, Laurel Summit, Laurel Hill, Laurel Ridge, Lynn Run, and Cooser State Parks. You may enjoy the forest if you enjoy a wide variety of outdoor activities. I'm excited to welcome Rachel Mahoney to the podcast. Rachel is the Environmental Education Specialist at Forbes State Forest. Rachel, thanks so much for joining the program.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
How would you describe the forest to someone who's never been there before?
Great question. So I would say that Forbes State Forest is pretty unique in that it is surrounded by many really popular state parks, and it's really accessible and easy to get to most parts of our state forest. We aren't that far of a drive from Pittsburgh, about an hour or so, and other communities like Connellsville and Somerset have a lot of people. So I'd say that our state forest is very well traveled and a popular spot for a lot of people just seeking peace and solitude. And then I'd also say that our state forest is really interesting and that most of it is in these upland mountain areas. I guess a lot of our state forest can be in Pennsylvania, but this one specifically, Forbes, is divided by 3 distinct ridges. So we have the Laurel Ridge, which is the 70-mile ridge line, which the Laurel Highlands hiking trail traverses over. And then there's the Chestnut Ridge that goes from Morgantown all the way into Indiana County, which is outside of our service area, but still kind of in that general vicinity. And then the Mount Davis Ridge line, which is the 30-mile mountain chain that goes from the Castleman River all the way down into Cumberland, Maryland. So lots of unique high elevation areas to visit and recreate, and really close to local communities and city areas to bring people in to enjoy the scenic beauty.
What do you love most about Forbes State Forest?
That's a tricky question. So I can definitely try to do my best to answer this. So me personally, I would say that I love the proximity of the state forest to other natural treasures like the popular state parks that I was just talking about, as well as just the local communities. Forbes State Forest has a great way of providing an illusion that you are far removed from society, but in reality, you're really not, which is kind of convenient. So it gives the facade that you're removed from civilization, but you're really not that far. So if you want to go grab lunch in a town somewhere, you're likely not that far off. So it's kind of nice to plan a trip to come out and have all of these other options where you can go into a local community to get food, or if you don't want to camp on the state forest, have somewhere to stay. So I just say the convenience of it, how close you are to a lot of different things. And I just really like certain parts of our state forest for that peace and solitude.
Forbes State Forest is made up of 15 tracts across 3 counties. What can visitors expect if they explore the forest?
Yeah, so depending on the tract of forest land that they visit, they can expect different experiences. So in our Laurel Mountain Division, that is actually our most popular division of our state forest. By popular, I mean that it's just like the most well-traveled area and where we see a lot of population density and visitor density, especially on the weekends. So wildlife like deer, songbirds, turkey, and other occasional black bears they might see. I always joke and I call myself the bear whisperer because I feel like when I'm out and about solo, which happens fairly often, I almost always, I can't say always, but I'd say almost always encounter a black bear. So, but they are there. But if you're traveling in groups, obviously something you're not really going to see. So in other low density and more dispersed areas of the state forest, like our Roaring Run Natural Area, visitors may not see anyone during their visit, but instead they may get to see beautiful mountain streams and these really biodiverse, rich plant communities, and maybe even get a better view of wildlife and local history. So, I mean, depending on where you're at, there's so many different stories that our forest tells as far as the natural or cultural history of those areas. And it's just a really, really special place to explore with lots of diversity and diverse experiences.
It must be so wonderful to have that diversity, to be able to get different experiences, because you're not just always near a town or always out in the wilderness. You get to actually go back and forth, and you get to kind of determine your own destiny and how you want to experience the outdoors.
Definitely, for sure. And I always feel like the Laurel Highlands, which is, in southwestern Pennsylvania, where Forbes State Forest traverses, it is kind of like a vacation spot, right? So especially in the summer, we see a lot of visitation throughout the area. The roadways are a little bit more crowded, but it's kind of a cool feeling at the same time to know that I'm working somewhere that is a vacation destination to a lot of people. And I hope to share a lot of those diverse experiences with people through the programming that we offer, and then just also providing information and education to people about places that they can go to visit and recreate.
Forbes State Forest has more than 250 miles of trails and roads suitable for hiking. Do you have any long and short trail recommendations?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I just mentioned, the Laurel Mountain Division of our state forest is one of the most popular tracts of our forest land, and that it's just very accessible, especially to folks traveling from Pittsburgh, Ligonier, surrounding communities. And it's in proximity to a lot of state parks. So, I always joke that it can be really confusing when you're traveling on our state forest to know exactly where you are, because there's game lands, there's private land, and then there's all of these state parks kind of scattered throughout. And I also like to mention that most of the state parks in the Laurel Highlands, so not only is it Laurel Highlands, the Laurel Mountain Division of Forbes, but then it's Laurel something, fill in the blank state park. So we have Laurel Mountain State Park, there's Laurel Hill State Park Complex, there's Laurel Ridge State Park, which is a part of the Laurel Hill State Park Complex. There's Laurel Summit State Park. So it can be extremely confusing to know where you are at any point in time. But it is in that proximity to all of those other amazing natural resources. And I think that maybe that can make it a little less intimidating to come to that tract of our state forest land, just because oftentimes people that come to Laurel Mountain, to that division, they think that they're actually at Lynn Run State Park. So maybe there's some confusion there and they're just like, okay, well, we're going to go out here instead to recreate. It's less isolated of a feel. Again, it's very accessible to a lot of different people. So I think that that has something to do with it. So anyways, in the Laurel Mountain Division, Beam Rocks is one of the most popular hikes regardless of the season. So that is just a quick 1 mile round trip out and back that goes over somewhat uneven terrain, but I would rate it easy to moderate. So it takes folks out from the trailhead out to a scenic vista halfway throughout the hike that overlooks out towards the east, towards the town of Jennerstown, and out towards the Somerset County side of Laurel Mountain. And then another really, really popular area is you would drive to Laurel Summit State Park. You would park there. It's a very small 6-acre state park that is run and administered by the Lynn Run State Park Complex. And then all of the surrounding forest around this picnic area is actually Forbes State Forest again. So it's very confusing. People don't always know where they're at, and that is okay. That's why we're here to educate them, right? So from Laurel Summit State Park, you can access our Wolf Rocks Trailhead, which is about a 4.5-mile hike. It doesn't seem like a lot of miles, but it is very rugged terrain. As the name implies, rocks, there's lots of them. So most places in Pennsylvania, we always joke there's rocks and roots. There's certainly no shortage of that in Laurel Highlands. So this hike takes visitors halfway throughout their hike, takes them to a scenic vista. And that, in my opinion, is one of the best vistas that we have on Forbes State Forest. It overlooks the Lynn Run Valley. And it's a much more expansive experience than the Beam Rocks hike. But again, it's more of a commitment. It's not as accessible and easy to get out to, but I think that it is for sure one of the best places and one of the longer hikes in that division. But I mean, I could probably go on for an hour about short and long hiking recommendations. So I always encourage, if people have questions about certain trails or recommendations, that they can always reach out to me personally, or they can reach out to the Forbes State Forest office, and I'd be more than happy to help.
The 70-mile Laurel Highlands hiking trail runs through Forbes State Forest. Where will this trail take hikers if they decide to take it on?
Yeah, so this is a really special trail. So Laurel Ridge State Park is actually who manages the Laurel Highlands hiking trail. So that is part of the Laurel Hill State Park complex. So a lot of laurels here, right? so there you will be quizzed at the end of this podcast to make sure you remember where everything is. No, I'm just kidding. But the Laurel Hill State Park complex, they're close partners of ours, and they're the ones who manage the Laurel Highlands hiking trail. So it's kind of interesting. I always like to share with people that the trail is a state park, which can be kind of a weird thing to imagine, right? Because the trail does go through, again, different tracts of land that is owned by different land managers. So there's some of the Laurel Highlands hiking trail that goes through state game lands. Some of it goes through Forbes State Forest, and we have about 12 or so miles of the Laurel Highlands hiking trail that goes through Forbes State Forest. So this trail, yeah, it's pretty special. I don't know, have you ever been on any parts of the Laurel Highlands hiking trail?
Very small portions of it.
Very small portions. Yeah. So as you mentioned, it's a 70-mile trail. Mile marker 0 starts at Ohiopyle State Park, and the trail goes all the way to Seward, which is a town just outside of Johnstown. So that's where mile 70 is located. And along the trail, there's 8 different shelter areas or sites. And then within those shelter areas, there's several Adirondack-style backpacking shelters that have a fireplace, and then they have an open side to them. And then there's several camp tenting areas within those shelter areas as well. There's running water at most of them, but the water is not potable. So you would definitely want to make sure you filter. And then there's also bathrooms, which are, the less glamorous latrines, as we like to call them. But they, of course, serve their purpose when you're out backpacking in the forest and in the state park. So the reservations for that, they can be made online through the Reserve America online reservation system, or by calling Laurel Hill State Park Complex. And for me personally, I've hiked 45 miles of this trail through various times in my life, whether it be in my personal life, just to get out with my family, or doing overnight guided trips as part of my job. But I still have that final northern section that I haven't really done. And it's from Route 30 all the way out to Seward. But I've been on every other section. I've stayed at every other shelter site. But that's just that one portion that I just haven't gotten around to. But people can expect now to see a lot more people using that trail, using those shelter areas. And again, you do have to make reservations if you do plan on camping overnight. So again, you can do that online or by calling the state park.
Forbes is home to the 3,213-foot Mount Davis. How can listeners get to the highest point in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. Obviously, we're pretty excited that we can boast that Forbes State Forest has the highest point in the state of Pennsylvania. So it's fairly accessible. It can be a little tricky. You have to take a couple of back roads to get there, but it's pretty well signed once you get off of the main highways. So folks can actually take Route 219 south or 669, and both of those will take you to the high point. So the high point area is actually located off of Mount Davis Road, and the address is actually Myersdale. So it's just a little bit outside of Myersdale, tucked between Myersdale and Salisbury. But essentially, if you were to go on Google, do your research, download our brochure about how to get to Mount Davis, that would probably be your best bet to go about it that way. Because again, I could go over directions right now, literally, but that would be really boring. So you can find that information on how to get to the actual by driving there online. If you type in Forbes State Forest Mount Davis brochure, we do have information. And then of course, I always recommend, for some reason, I have better luck with Google Maps than I have with Apple Maps, but even so, technology can have its room for error. So just make sure you research and have your directions downloaded before you head out. But visitors, once they arrive to the High Point area, they kind of have two options. They can either drive almost right up to the High Point observation area, which would then take you to a large parking lot, and you would have a very, very short walk out to the observation area. Or if you're a little bit more adventurous, you have the option of parking at the Mount Davis picnic area, which is a really, really nice state forest picnic area. It's one of the 2 state forest picnic areas that we have on Forbes. And then you could do just under a mile walk from the picnic area out to the high point. It's about, I think, 0.8 miles. So you're looking at just over 1.5 miles round trip to do an out and back. But that high point observation area is where the High Point Rock stands. So a lot of people, when they come out to the High Point, they think that they're going to be like on some dramatic landscape, like out in the Rocky Mountains or like out west where like there's these rocky crags. Well, that's just not the geology of the area. Through the different geologic processes that occurred over millions of years, the profile of that mountain range of the Mount Davis Ridge line is very much just like that of a plateau. And the high point is actually on a big sandstone boulder. So it's kind of crazy. You walk, you're like, where's the high point? Well, you'll see at the top of this boulder, there's a USGS benchmark. It says 3,213 feet, Mount Davis. So you can hike or you can drive. And then once you get to that observation area, there's High Point Rock. We do have some interpretive waysides or just interpretive panels that people can learn about the area, which we are currently working on updating all of that information. So hopefully within the next year or two, all of those signs should be brand new with new language and updated information. So that's been an ongoing project that we're really excited about. And then of course, the creme de la creme, the observation tower. So it is a 50-foot observation tower up at the High Point area that puts you 50 feet above the highest point, and you can climb it. You just can't come to that area at dusk. So it closes at sunset and it opens once, dayfall hits that area. So that is an area that we do close at night. So you can climb that observation tower anytime during the day, and it provides a really nice panoramic view of the surrounding forest land. We actually just painted and updated that tower too. So that was a really exciting project that was just completed this past fall. So we're doing a lot of beautification in that area. And it's just a really, really special area to visit. And I encourage anyone that is a Pennsylvania resident it's a must to come out to your state's high point.
As you've spoken about a little, visitors have several scenic vistas to view on a trip to Forbes. What are some of the vistas people can see?
So I had already mentioned 2 of the most popular vistas in our Laurel Mountain division of the Forbes State Forest, which was Beam Rocks and Wolf Rocks, but we do have a few other vistas that people can visit. This includes the Pine Knob Overlook, which is located in our Braddock division. We call it our Pondfield division at Forbes State Forest, but that is just right outside of the town of Hopwood, outside of Uniontown. People can access Pine Knob Trail from the Lake Hollow picnic area, which is our second state forest picnic area on Forbes State Forest. So that our state forest picnic areas, that one is gated. So it opens Memorial Day, it closes Labor Day. So you can actually drive in and get right up to the trailhead, whereas any other time of the year, you kind of have to park away from the gate, hike down in, and it's a bit more of a logistical planning situation. So I encourage people, come whenever the gates open, you can drive in, and then you can hike up to the overlook. I will say that is a very strenuous hike. You are hiking up the mountainside, but it does offer you a really cool view of that overlooks Hopwood and then out towards Uniontown. So that's one of our other vistas that I would say is not, it's popular, but it's not. It's kind of like hidden, but not. I guess it's more of a seasonal vista. And then I mentioned the observation tower at Mount Davis that people can climb to get a panoramic view of the surrounding forest land. And then in the Mount Davis division as well, which again is southern Somerset County, very close to the Maryland state border, there's the High Point Overlook, which is very accessible. You literally just drive along South Wolf Rock Road past. If you drive to the High Point area, you would just turn out of there, keep going down the State Forest Road. And if you're turning out of the observation area on the right side of the road, you will see there's like a little viewing platform. It states that it was built by an Eagle Scout, and then you'll see High Point Lake. So it's just a really nice overview of the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission's High Point Lake. And it's just, yeah, it's a really cool spot and really easy to get to. And it kind of gives you more of an idea of how high up you actually are from the valley below.
What is Corun Falls and what makes it so popular with visitors?
Yeah, Corun Falls, it's about a 20-foot tall waterfall. It's located in our Blue Hole division of Forbes State Forest. This division borders Seven Springs Mountain Ski Resort's property. So it's very, very close to Seven Springs. So it's fairly accessible for people to get to. And it's only about a 100-foot walk from the parking lot. So I would say that it's one of our more dramatic waterfalls that we have on the state forest. Of course, we have lots and lots of miles of streams, but to have a waterfall that, is that dramatic, that high up, isn't super common in the streams that we have on our state forest. So I'd say that attracts people. The proximity to the parking lot attracts people. And I just think that division in general brings people out and about because the namesake of the division is Blue Hole. I think we always joke about this at our office that I think that just about every community in the Laurel Highlands has a Blue Hole. So we're like, oh yeah, Blue Hole. Just like how we're like, yeah, Laurel Mountain. And they're like, what are you even talking about? So like there's a Blue Hole in Connellsville. There's a Blue Hole in Darlington, which is just right outside of Ligonier by our district office. Like there's Blue Holes everywhere. So we're like, okay, no, the Blue Hole in Somerset. They're like, oh yeah, by Seven Springs. So there's actually a very large swimming or, depending on your preference, fishing hole that is called Blue Hole. So just the way that the depth of the water is, which I don't even know how the deepest part of that, to be honest with you, but the way that the light hits, the geology, the rocks around that area just give it the illusion that it's a very, very blue body of water. So it is a popular spot for a lot of people to visit that. And then I think in turn, visit Corun Falls. So there's two big highlights in that pretty small division.
Is there something everyone should experience when they visit?
That is a loaded question. Because I don't think that I can say that there's one particular thing or experience that I could tell one person that they should experience. I think it's very subjective, right? And I think it just depends on the individual's preferences. I would say that on Forbes State Forest, there are recreation opportunities for just about everyone, including driving or sightseeing on some of our very scenic forest roads, hunting and fishing, hiking, backpacking, of course. There's horseback riding, trails, mountain biking, and then in the wintertime, snowmobiling, snowshoeing, cross-country skiing. And believe it or not, we even get people that enjoy dog sledding, which is pretty interesting. So I would just suggest visiting the state forest in all seasons, really, and figure out which one you like best and what activities you like best as well, and come out to the state forest with an open mind, but also a plan, right? But I will say this also as a disclaimer, I love the winter time, but it's important to be mindful that in the winter time that our state forest roads are unmaintained. So maybe do a little weather forecast check before you come out in the winter time. And we do have cross-country ski trail camera that our volunteers at PAXA, the Pennsylvania Association for Cross Country Skiers, they set up at our Laurel Mountain warming hut, which is in our Laurel Mountain division. So you can kind of see part of that ridge and maybe how much snow there is. So it can kind of give you an idea like, hey, yeah, we're not going to be traveling very far on the state forest in the winter. But I'd say that, yeah, I can't really give you a specific, this is what you should do. I just would encourage you to do some research, ask questions, reach out to the staff here at Forbes State Forest. We'd be happy to work with you to help you figure out a plan. And then just go out with an open mind and figure out, what makes you tick, what activities do you enjoy, and where do you enjoy doing them? Because we have over 60,000 acres of state forest land, and like we already said, over 250 miles of shared use trails. So there's a lot for everybody.
And now, let's hear from our sponsors. Registration is now open for the Keystone Trails Association's 25K Trail Challenge on September 7th. Open to both trail runners and hikers, the KTA 25K Trail Challenge is the perfect opportunity to push yourself to the limit. With steep climbs, rocky terrain, fantastic vistas, and scenic forest hollows along the picturesque lower Susquehanna River Gorge. Participating in this challenge helps further the organization's mission of protecting, preserving, and providing safe and enjoyable hiking opportunities within Pennsylvania. Register today at kta-hike.org. Are you looking for your next adventure? Unlock some of the best landscapes in Pennsylvania with incredibly detailed, highly curated, waterproof trail maps from the folks at Purple Lizard. They create extraordinary maps of Pennsylvania State Forest for people who love to explore the outdoors. Find them at your local outfitters, bike shops, and bookstores, or visit purplelizard.com, where your next adventure begins. Hey, podcast explorers. Did you know Pennsylvania state parks and forests are the heartbeat of our Commonwealth? They're not just natural wonders, they're vital for our well-being and local economies. That's where the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation steps in. They rally volunteers, raise funds, and advocate for these precious lands. Join the movement to preserve and enjoy our outdoor treasures. Learn more at paparksandforests.org. Let's keep Pennsylvania untamed and beautiful together. All right, back to the show. I typically would ask what you would recommend for people who have a couple days or a couple hours to visit. With what you just said, do you think it's best to just go to a state park, go to a state forest and say, hey, I love hiking. I haven't done a ton of research. Where do you recommend? And they could help you out from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that, at least me personally, whenever I'm planning to go somewhere that maybe I'm not familiar with, I'll ask friends or ask, just acquaintances like that I know have visited that area, like, hey, where would you suggest? And then usually my next step is, ask the source, contact the source. That's why we're all here. We're here to answer your questions and to educate you and to help you, in the best way possible. So I would definitely say don't be shy or, feel weird about calling us. That's why we're here to help people out and figure out, how we can make visitors' experiences enjoyable on the state forest. I would also say that, maybe think outside of the box a little bit too. So I'd suggest visiting different areas of the state forest if you have a couple of days, and then adding a few of those state parks into the mix as well. So something I did think of would be, maybe start somewhere like Laurel Mountain that is very accessible right off of Route 30. Go into that division up on top of the ridge, go on a day hike, and then maybe go over to Laurel Hill State Park, which is just a quick drive away, about 30 minutes, 35 minutes. And then from there, head down to our Braddock division in Fayette County, check out the Quebec Run Wild area, and then stop over at Ohio Pile State Park for lunch, explore that area. And I mean, really, there's just so much to see. So I don't think there's any right or wrong answer or any wrong or right way to explore, but I always like to encourage people to plan ahead and be prepared, so that they can have the best experience possible.
Well, it sounds like the best thing about Forbes is not only is there so much that's accessible, but it's also so spread out. So if you want to spend a weekend exploring just one part, you'll be able to, or just one state park or one piece of this. And that's really exciting about the area, because if you were to look on a map and just look where Forbes is located and where all the state parks are located, I mean, it's like a straight line of like 7 in a row. So it's like you have a ton to do.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, there's definitely not a shortage of things to see or do. Yeah, it's a really special area. Like I said, I can definitely see why a lot of people consider the Laurel Highlands a vacation destination because I'm thinking about in my personal life, like what do I do with my family, right? I really enjoy going to national parks, kind of the same thing, you know. You find an area that has a lot to do and you can just spend some time there and really diving deep into what all that area has to offer. And I think the Laurel Highlands is very similar in that sense. You can get a lot of different experiences and that makes it really special.
As somebody who's just now starting to explore national parks, do you have a favorite?
Oh gosh. Well, I so I became mom in 2000s or in 2000. Oh my gosh, not that long ago. To the 2020. It feels like it's been that long. So I haven't really traveled as much since then, but I did quite a bit of traveling before that. And oh gosh, that is such a hard question. The last national park I visited was Olympic National Park, and that was in the beginning of 2020, right before the world kind of shut down. So I say that that area has a really special place in my heart because it was like kind of the last place that we visited before everything changed. And it was just like otherworldly, you know. I've been all over the country and that area was just so special, so cool, and so diverse. I mean, there's rainforest, there's coastline, there's, you know, these mountains with snow-capped mountains. It was wild, super cool. Yeah.
The West is just different. It's
Oh, it
just
is
yeah.
for sure. I worked in Arizona for a little bit with a National Park Service, and like I love the desert Southwest too. It's just, yeah, our country is incredible. There's so many cool natural gems and natural resources and parks and forests to visit that I mean, you could go decades and, you know, barely touch everything if you were to explore every trail there is. It's incredible.
Yeah, my wife and I did a national park trip in Arizona last year, and we saw every national park there. There's three, and
Yeah.
everyone was so completely and utterly different. You're like Grand Canyon, obviously you know what that's about, and then you go south to
Mhm.
Saguaro, and then you
Yeah.
go Petrified Forest, and you
Uh-huh.
couldn't get more different and
I
interesting.
know.
It's so wonderful. I love the national parks.
Yeah, they're incredible. And I mean, our state parks and our state forests in Pennsylvania are compared sometimes to even our national parks. They're, you know, I hate to say like elite, but like they are some of the best out of our country. Some of our best state parks and state forests that we have are in Pennsylvania. And I think we're really fortunate for that, especially as Pennsylvania residents, to kind of have these things in our own backyard, these places to explore and enjoy. So you don't even have to drive all the way out to Arizona. I mean, of course, if you love to travel, go for it. But you know what I'm getting at is that there's just so much to see and explore here too that you don't have to, you know, plan some elaborate trip. But make sure you plan.
Yeah.
Plan a little bit, but yeah, you know.
I mean, I'd certainly put Ohio Pile against any other state park in the country.
Oh, it's incredible. Oh, yeah. It's just, yeah, there's so much to do. I mean, just I think the power of water and having the Youghiogheny River and having that draw, I feel like people are drawn to water, right? They're
Hmm.
just like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. It's this powerful force. And um, of course, you know, their education staff there is incredible as well. I work with them a good bit and they have a lot of really interesting things going on. The town is part of the state park, which is very unique as well. So yeah, it's just such a special area with a lot of diversity. And yeah, we have state forest that is very near to Ohio Pile State Park. So I find that very interesting and cool as well that you can kind of shoot over to Ohio Pile from Forbes or vice versa and get a nice diversity of experiences.
I know this is a loaded question, but when do you think is the best time to visit Forbes State Forest?
Oh, yeah, of course. I'm gonna give, like, the very diplomatic answer, but again, I think it's just the personal preference and depending on things that people like or dislike, right? Some people have a higher tolerance for gnats and bugs, like, in their eyes, right? Whereas other people are like, "I absolutely can't stand that." Some people are deathly afraid of snakes, which we do have, you know, venomous snakes on our state forest in the high elevation areas, so I think all of these different things or accessibility, just temperature, like what people's comfort level are all going to kind of dictate like what season, you know, people will want to come out. But for me personally, I love the springtime and I love autumn. I love those very like dramatic transitional seasons. In the spring, I really just enjoy watching the forest kind of spring back to life, no pun intended. But it's really cool just to see everything begin to green up again. And to see the spring ephemeral wildflowers pop up, that is my big thing. Forestry, we're all about plants, and I am obsessed with spring wildflowers. If anyone has come to my programs, they know this. I do a lot of wildflower programming during the springtime, and they're just so special and so diverse. And we have some really incredible places on our state forest where we have a lot of diversity of these wildflowers, and they're just really special. And then, of course, in the autumn, obvious reasons, right, for fall foliage in the Laurel Highlands. We're in a lot of high elevation areas. Again, we span 3 different ridges. So we will see a nice kind of succession of fall color, so to speak. So the higher elevation areas, you'll see change color sooner than the lower elevation areas. So it's kind of nice that, especially when I'm working, the fall foliage could be at peak up on Laurel Mountain, but maybe down in the Chestnut Ridge area, it's just starting, or over at Mount Davis, it's already past. But then when I drive to the lower elevation areas of our state forest, it's just starting, or it hasn't even started yet. So I kind of get that nice mix of the colors for like an extended period of time, which is super, super cool. So I really do enjoy that. And fall foliage brings people from all over, right? It's a big draw for tourism into the area. So it's just kind of like a really special experience. I think it really unites humans, like it unites everyone. It's like one of those things that people get excited about, right? Like we get excited about Christmas or different holidays and things that kind of bring us all together. I think fall foliage does that for a lot of people in the Laurel Highlands. And just because, it's nature's last hurrah before the trees go into dormancy, and the Laurel Highlands has some of the best places to view the spectacular fall foliage. And also, another reason why I really like the fall and the spring is because the bugs aren't all that bad.
Yeah.
So, as someone who is out in the forest a good bit, I really have a hard time enjoying being out in the humidity of like August, like late August, like fall's gonna happen soon, but those gnats when they get into your eyes. So I have a very low tolerance for that. So spring and fall are definitely my favorite.
What kind of camping options are available in Forbes?
Yeah, so we have 6 motorized campsites. We just kind of renamed these as also like roadside campsites. So you might see both terms used interchangeably. And then basically these sites are where you can drive a vehicle or a small trailer or RV into, and they're somewhat primitive in nature. So they aren't going to have like a latrine. They're not going to have running water. They're just going to have a picnic table and a fire ring. And you're kind of responsible for all of your other comfort items and amenities that you would need to camp. These sites can all be reserved online through the Reserve America online reservation system that State Parks uses. This was a transition that happened a little over a year ago. So it's really convenient for people. You can go online and you can see the different campsites, the motorized sites that are available. We have 2 in our Laurel Mountain Division. We have 1 that is in our Blue Hole Division. We have 1 in our Mount Davis Division. And then we have 2 in our Braddock, or as we sometimes call Pondfield Division, which is in our Fayette County portion of State Forest. So you can hop online. You can see the availability of these sites, which is great. There are fees to stay at them. So it's $10 a night. And then there's a small service fee for using the reservation system that State Parks also includes in their fees. So it's no surprise. Whenever you're booking, you'll know exactly what you owe. And then in addition to the roadside or motorized camping, there are primitive camping options. So we call this our backpack style camping. So essentially you're packing all of your gear and equipment that you need for your camping experience on your back. You're hiking in to an area where you are permitted to camp, and you just kind of set up and do your thing. We have rules and regulations for both different types of camping that we have on our state forest. For primitive camping, we require people to be at least 200 feet away from a parking lot or a road, 100 feet away from a water source, and 25 feet away from a trail.
Mm-hmm.
So it just kind of keeps everyone off the beaten path, and then you're not disturbing other forest visitors. And then There's also specific areas that are closed. So most places are open to camping unless posted closed. And you can find all of this information, listeners can find this information online. Again, if you go on Google, would be the easiest way, Forbes State Forest camping, and then all of this information, the rules and regs for primitive, the definitions for primitive versus motorized. And then, of course, if you want to reserve motorized, you can go on Reserve America. For primitive camping, we have different rules. So you don't actually go online to reserve through Reserve America. We only require permits for primitive camping if you're staying in the same site for more than one night. But of course, we often get people calling the office and asking how they go about this process. And we strongly encourage, even if you're just staying one night over backpacking, that you still get a permit. It's free. You contact the office for a permit. You call us, the Forbes State Forest District office, and our clerical staff will help you out. And essentially, it's just a way for us to kind of keep tabs and to let rangers know what's going on if we see a vehicle parked for a period of time, and for safety. You can never be too cautious. I think it's just kind of good to be prepared and let other people kind of know where you're at as well. So our camping has become very popular in the last 4 years. So mostly every weekend is booked up until the campsites are closed. So you can find the camping season, all of that information online as well through Reserve America.
There are 2 natural areas and 1 wild area in the forest. What do these areas protect and highlight?
Yeah, so we have the Mount Davis Natural Area and the Roaring Run Natural Area. And then our one wild area is the Quebec Run Wild Area. So the Mount Davis area encompasses the unique geology of the region, and it contains the state's highest point, which is one of the main reasons why it received the natural area designation many years ago. The Roaring Run Natural Area, which is, we haven't really discussed yet, but that is situated in Somerset County as well. Kind of on the line of Westmoreland and Somerset. And it has unique plant communities, and it also is designated as a reptile and amphibian area per the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. So that makes that area fairly unique. And then Roaring Run is also a designated wilderness trout stream and has high water quality per DEP. So this is essentially just due to the fact that the headwaters of Roaring Run are all kind of contained within that natural area boundary. So it's a really great place if you like to fish for native brook trout. It's a very small stream, but really, really beautiful spot, and lots of just really unique geology, varying topography all throughout, and then just some really interesting plants in that area. And then Quebec Run, our wild areas are set aside more specifically just for peace and solitude. So I would say that that's mainly why that area was set aside. Most of our wild areas in our state parks and state forests are to have like low density recreation. And in general, our state forest system also is maintained in a way to have and foster low density recreation. Quebec Run does have a good bit of trails, but you can still find peace and solitude in the area. It's a very rugged area. Once you start going down, you have to climb back up. So it's kind of in this little valley with just kind of going up and down with lots of rocks. But of course, as I had mentioned in recent years, the wild area has, much like other parts of our state forest, visitation has drastically increased. So on weekends, you'll probably run into people, whereas maybe during the week, you might not run into anyone while you're out hiking. You can mountain bike. It's a very popular area for people to primitive or backpack style camp. We just ask that, you follow any postings that say that it's closed to camp, an area is closed to camping, and that you're mindful of where, you're setting up. But essentially, the wild areas are for that peace and solitude, which you certainly can get.
Forbes State Forest is a wonderful place to wildlife watch. What kind of animals could visitors see, and are there any that people should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, so it really depends on where you are on the state forest. And if you're traveling solo, are you with a group? Are you with your children? More importantly, are you being loud? Or are you being quiet? I joke, of course, but there's a lot of other factors to consider when it comes to seeing animals, right? Wild animals out in the forest. Most animals are very much scared of loud noises. They tend to just kind of go off and do their own thing if they can hear that people are near. So I think that what I had just mentioned will have an impact on if you're able to see animals. We do have an area of our state forest. It is called our Mountain Streams Tract, which is part of our Laurel Mountain Division, but it's not situated up on the ridge like the Laurel Mountain that I've been discussing, where it's a popular, recreation area. Our Mountain Streams Division, or tract, sorry, within the Laurel Mountain Division, it is right off of Route 381, fairly close to Route 31 near the Towns of Jones Mills. And this area has been managed for American woodcock habitat. You might be like, what the heck is an American woodcock? It is a game bird. It's a small bird. And it's a bird that we're seeing across Pennsylvania has been losing habitat just due to forest maturation over time. They prefer early successional habitat. So meaning once an area is disturbed, they like the brushy, the young trees, the shrubs, the herbaceous plants. They don't like the really tall, thick forest canopies. So a lot of our forests are maturing throughout the state. So this area essentially was a partnership with a lot of other organizations, Game Commission, Grouse Unlimited. I could go on and on, local universities. And for about 5, 6, 7 years, I want to say, that area, different tracts of the mountain streams have been managed for woodcock. So the reason I mentioned woodcock is that because if you haven't heard of them, you don't know a lot about them, they're actually a really, really cool bird. So during the springtime, the male woodcock will actually do this mating or courtship dance, which is called a sky dance. You can go on YouTube and type in sky dance American woodcock, and you'll see these males have this really funky call that they do. It's a peent. They go peent, peent, and it's very nasally, and then they just shoot up into the air and they make these whirling, swirling noises. It's just really wild, really cool to see. So I would say a really great way to kind of ring in the spring, the new season, early in the spring or even the late winter, is to go to this area. You're almost guaranteed to see these birds, and you'll see the males doing this courtship dance, which is really, really silly and fun and just a great family activity. You can do that at dusk. That's usually when they're doing it right before it gets really dark out. So I would say that, and you don't have to be super quiet for that. You probably need to be a little bit quiet, but and then other areas of our state forest, of course, we have an abundance of songbirds, lots of different mammals, deer, you name it. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we do have black bear. We're in the ridges, we're in areas where there's really great habitat and food availability to black bear. And again, I must be the bear whisperer, because almost every time I've been out by myself, I not literally run into one, but I see one, which is always a very humbling experience. And then turkey. I see turkey, whether you see signs of turkey, like areas where they've scratched, or actually seeing turkey. And believe it or not, ruffed grouse are state bird of Pennsylvania. I've flushed quite a few with my work vehicle, just driving through some of these really enclosed, heavily forested areas. I flushed them with my car, which is kind of cool. So lots of animals, lots of wildlife viewing. But again, it depends on if you're quiet or if you're not, I think, and just where you're at.
In addition to the many natural features in the forest, there are plenty of historical points of interest. Can you talk about a couple of these, like the Wharton Iron Furnace and remnants of the 2 civilian conservation camps?
I think the interesting thing about all state forests is that there is a wealth of history at all of these different sites among the 20 different forest districts we have throughout the state. And specifically in Forbes, there's so many different tracts of state forest land and our 5 different divisions, and they all kind of have a different story to tell. I think, going back to pre-European settlements, there were different Native American peoples that called these places home. And there's lots of different stories that we don't often hear because they aren't often told, or, aren't listened to for whatever the myriad of reasons may be. And then once European settlers came into this region, where bits of these stories were added to and more and more and more over time. And I think it's just very easy to overlook these little bits of history and kind of choose a niche or a particular storyline to follow in a particular state forest or a particular state park. So while we have these tangible landmarks to help tell a story, like an iron furnace or a fire tower, I think that there's just so much more history beneath that we still kind of need to work towards unearthing and think a lot more about how our public places and spaces in Pennsylvania are, where they came from, and then starting to investigate and learn more about that entire story. Not just as individual chapters that may have been told for decades and decades. And as you had mentioned on Forbes, there is so much history. So just like any state forest, so many stories to tell. Areas of our state forest and our Roaring Run Natural area specifically, there were many homesteads and farmsteads in that area. You can see remnants of those with old stone foundations from homes. You can actually see areas where there were orchards, where you can see succession taking place, the reestablishment of larger, more mature trees, old school foundations, monuments, things like that. And there are a lot of different stories to focus on, but you had mentioned the Civilian Conservation Corps, which Forbes State Forest had 4 Civilian Conservation Corps or CCC camps. And, as you know, that was a popular program. It was a nationwide program that started in the 1930s as a result of the Great Depression. Franklin D. Roosevelt enacted this program to hire young men and to offer them employment to work in what are today our state forests and our state parks. They earned about $30 a month, and that money went home to their parents to essentially provide for them. So much different than today, right? Much different. But so there are 3 particular CCC camps that are still actually state forest owned. There was a 4th one. It was our Fort Necessity. It was a Fort Necessity CCC camp that is now on National Park Service or the U.S. Department of Interior's property. It used to be Forbes State Forest. It used to be Commonwealth of Pennsylvania owned, but that land, the hands of the land management changed some time ago. But today you can see some remnants of Civilian Conservation Corps stuff, nothing quite like what you would see over at Laurel Hill State Park, where they still have done some really incredible rehabilitation and restoration of those old structures. But so at the Mount Davis division, you can see remnants of the CCC era by visiting the Mount Davis picnic area. The pavilion there is original. It was CCC constructed. That camp was from, I believe, 1933 to 1937. So it was very short-lived, about 4 years or so. They've constructed most of the trails in the Mount Davis division as well. And a lot of people actually think that the observation tower was built by the CCC or that it was a fire tower. No, it was neither of that. It was never a fire tower. It was always an observation tower, and it was actually constructed a year or 2 right before the CCC started in that area. So yeah, you can see 2 old cabins as well. If you travel near our maintenance headquarters in the Mount Davis division, there are 2 cabins that are original to that time. And we do have some interpretive panels to kind of explain, what the Civilian Conservation Corps was, as well as, what these structures are. Another place to visit that actually has only 1 structure remaining, but you wouldn't really guess it if you were unknowing and just driving through the area. But in our Blue Hole division, there is a forest headquarters cabin, and it's by the Fall Run area of the Blue Hole division. And I did get some interpretive panels made in that area a few years ago, and it kind of explains what that area was, the significance of it, and then it actually has a map that has a blueprint of what the camp, where everything was situated. So it gives people some context and a take-home message as to what was there and the importance of it, and how that legacy is carried on today through what we do as stewards of our state parks and our state forests. Now, the Wharton Iron Furnace, that's a whole other ball game. But of course we have so many interesting sites. We have the Wharton Iron Furnace in our Braddock division, which actually was originally a coal blast furnace. It was converted to a hot blast furnace. and that there is historical references to cannonballs for the Civil War actually being constructed out of that furnace. That is another really great area that I had the opportunity to get interpretive waysides put in a couple of years back. So again, people can go to the site and they can learn. There's I think we have 3 panels where they can learn about what all of that means. What's the significance of that? Because I think a lot of the times you travel throughout Pennsylvania, you might go to a state park or a state forest and you stumble across these remnants of the past. You might be like, what is that? It kind of explains, the iron furnaces and how it was such a big industry at that time, kind of before steel, became the big industry that replaced a lot of those iron furnaces. So there's railroad history. The Pittsburgh, Westmoreland, and Somerset Railroad was a really big mountain railroad that provided a lot of the raw materials from Laurel Mountain into the city centers like Pittsburgh and Somerset. So, we could talk for probably an hour about the history, but I think what I was getting at with what I was saying earlier is just like, keep in mind when you're visiting these places that there's layers and layers of history, and you can ask questions. And again, that's why we're here to help. And maybe you stumble across something that, maybe you find a railroad spike while you're hiking, or you find something interesting. I think it's worth discussing and having those conversations with the people that manage that land and to, learn more about these areas, because there's just so much significant history and it's really, really interesting. And I think important to know.
Do you have any tips for people who plan on visiting the forest, or any suggestions to make their visit as enjoyable as possible?
Absolutely. So my personal pro tip, life hack, if you want to call it, plan ahead and pack lots of snacks, right? Yeah. Have your glove box full of snacks. I only kid, but no, for real. From my personal experience, when you're hungry from exerting energy, from going on all these amazing hikes that we're talking about today, you get cranky, right? I get hangry, I get a little cranky, and then getting cranky is a recipe for just not having a really good time, right? It kind of ruins the rest of your day. So I kid, but I'm also kind of serious. But I keep kind of saying, make sure you plan ahead and prepare. That's one of those I think it's the first leave no trace principle that exists out of those 7 principles. But for sure, make sure that you have kind of a loose plan, know where you're going, at least have maps with you. Make sure that if you're using a GPS, that you have preloaded maps, downloaded them into your system before you go out, because there's many areas where you might lose service. And then, as we know, you might forget where you're at. So just have some backup methods for navigation to know where you're at. Of course, call us if you have any questions. Call the local land managers or whichever state park or state forest where you're visiting. That's why we're here to help and provide you with that information. But just make sure you have an idea where you're going, and tell people where you're at, and pack lots of snacks.
Rachel, thanks so much for talking to us. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was great chatting with you today. Thank you.
I want to thank my guest, Rachel Mahoney, for joining the podcast. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Meta for more information about upcoming episodes. You can support the podcast by buying merch at hemlockstohellbenders.com, or you can click support this show in the podcast description to provide a monthly donation. If you're a Pennsylvania business interested in advertising with the podcast, email us at hemlockstohellbenders@gmail.com. This has been Hemlocks to Hellbenders. I'll see you out there. Hosting, production, and editing by Christian Alexanderson. Music by John Sauer. Graphics by Matt Davis.